Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Holloman again. And this presentation today is on all the skills you need to write one of the most classic kinds of essays, and that is the definition essay. And I'm really excited because this is the kind of writing you may actually do most of all in your professional lives. Because a lot of times there's controversy, often at the level of single words. People debating about, what is literacy? What does it mean to be educated? What is happiness? What is rehabilitation? A lot of times there's controversy over these words, and you'll find yourself very skilled after this unit about how to engage well in controversy at the level of words. So as you've done some brainstorming, as you've thought through kind of what are controversial words surrounding your own fields, this is something that hopefully you'll be really excited to learn. Okay, so first is, as you think about words and definition, defining these words, these are the skills that even to this very day I use whenever someone's asking me to engage about a debatable word. Now, in the English department, a debatable word may even be what is good writing, that phrase, or a debate about pedagogy. What does it mean to teach? Or even what is an online learning community? Think about the debates, at the time that I'm making this PowerPoint, there are so many words, confusing words. What does it mean to be an anti-racist? What does it mean to be, what is performative allyship? What is white privilege? Or even things surrounding COVID-19, what does it mean to wear a mask? What does a mask symbolize? How do we define that word in terms of human rights and kind of the debates in different communities about whether or not the government can even ask us to do that? There's all kinds of ways you can weigh in, usually at the level of single words, and really promote great ideas throughout your profession. So here is the outline, and I'm really excited to teach you because this is the kind of work I do most of all in my own professional life. So in your introduction, you really want to have a sense of what I call overwhelming ethos, meaning why should we listen to you? Why is it appropriate for you to engage in this conversation? So as a college student, you may be thinking, I don't really have a lot of credibility. I don't know if I can weigh in on, the topics of the day related to my field, or maybe there's an ethical dilemma, or people are debating, words that you're like, I don't know, I'm not in the field yet. Well, that's when you just talk about what your major is. You can say, as an education major, or the idea of being a deeply concerned student. And don't forget the power of what we call the conversion experience ethos. And that's when you show how you've changed your mind about something. As someone who once believed this, I now argue for. That's a really powerful form of ethos. It's what infomercials depend upon. It's kind of whenever someone's trying to sell you something and they say, oh, I wasn't a believer, but I've changed my mind about this product, we tend to listen more. It's called conversion experience ethos. And finally, there's something called the disinterested party. And that's where you show, I see truth on both sides, and I don't really have a lot of expertise, so I'm not invested in the outcome, but let me tell you what I've learned. That's called the disinterested party. And sometimes you can do that if you're weighing in on something that's important to the culture, but maybe you don't have a lot of personal expertise. You want to just display to your reader why they should trust you, why they should listen to you. So after you build overwhelming ethos, the next thing you need to do in an introduction is build a sense of pathos, a strong sense of what's so wrong, dangerous, or troubling about the current use or understanding of this word or phrase or trend. Make the reader nervous. And there are even some verbs you can use. Like you can use verbs like we've overlooked, we've misunderstood, we've neglected. Let us know if we don't read this paper, we're going to miss out on something. And there's a dangerous trend going on with some of the words that we're talking about. When you talk about, and let's go broadly, philosophically, when you talk about ethics or when you talk about happiness, you're missing this, you're misunderstanding this. Or the idea of justice. Think about words that are really on your mind right now that you see people debating a lot about. It could even be words related to politics, democratic socialist. What even is that? If you're in a field where you're discussing these ideas in your classes, you may need to write a paper on, well, let me define this for you, or let me define some of these terms that people think they know what they mean, but they often don't. And then kairos, this is one of the most overlooked rhetorical appeals. Kairos is why this Why now? It's where you use words related to time, currently, recently. It lets me know that you're entering a current conversation because students who want to write about, global warming. Okay, why right now do we need to talk about it? What's the recent evidence, right now? Or if you want to talk about, immunizations, why is now the perfect time? And that's a lot of times where you need evidence. Show me a recent research report. Show me something current. Refer to a news article, refer to a blog. And I love words related to time, recent, current, things that let me know this is a timely conversation. By the way, this is huge if ever you're going to go into the publishing world. Whenever I have to produce a manuscript or an article for any editor, I always like to answer the questions, why this, why now, why me? So ethos, why me? Why now? Kairos, why this? Pathos. You're always kind of managing these rhetorical appeals. Now, logos. Logos is really your thesis. It's the question you ask. It's the promise of what your paper is going to argue. And it's a claim that you make. And I love it often in the form of a question. And some of the examples that you'll look at as we move through too, you can just think, can I frame this as a question? Like, what if we redefined, this particular word as this, what would that mean? So think about what question your paper will answer. Then what you move through is the background of the controversy. How did we get here? What are other people saying about it? This situates you in a professional conversation. This may be something that you didn't learn perhaps in English 15 or maybe in your high school writing classes. A lot of times you're taught just to produce a thesis and to start making your argument. But really, advanced writing is about entering into a current conversation. So talk about what other people are saying, talk about how we got here, what's the background. Anytime you can bring in other voices, that's wonderful. And you're going to use at least 2 or 3 quotes perfectly embedded. One of the main skill sets of this paper is dialoguing well with sources. So you may not have learned a lot about quoting others. We have resources about proper MLA citation, there's APA citation, there's Chicago. These are things that are widely taught on the internet if you need a refresher, and there are some resources provided for you. But the main thing I want you to know is there are 4 key skills once you actually have a quotation. Most people think, oh, you mean like citation, like I just need to have my source there. No. Using quotes and citation is a highly nuanced and beautiful skill that I will teach you and hopefully you'll remember forever. And this is the format I use in all of my own professional writing. So here are the 4 key skills. So here's a student wanting to dialogue with a scholar or trying to answer the question, what does it mean to be well educated? And the student wants to begin to dialogue with some of his sources. So the first is you have to introduce your source. I know that Alfie Kohn is an educator. So as I'm reading, I'm like, okay, he wrote an article, but the source is introduced. And then you use that analysis verb to lead off to tell me a little signal of what that quote's going to be. You could say educator Alfie Kohn claims, reiterates, articulates. Go through that list in How to Write with Flair to find a really key analytical verb. And then you go ahead and embed the quote. So educator Alfie Kohn claims it would be a mistake to reduce schooling to vocational preparation. And then look at what he does. He insists that this form of education only suits, and then look at that embedded quote, the demands of employers and financial interests. And then you go ahead and put the source in there, and you can put a period. Now, you actually don't need to put Kohn there because you've already told me that educator Alfie Kohn is above, but I put that in to let you get in the practice of you need to put your source there if you're using MLA citation, but we'll talk more about that. And then you want to reflect on the quote. So right there you see, I understand his argument, but as a Penn State senior who paid a fortune in my education only to find myself unprepared for my vocation. And then here's a little logos appeal here. I aim to redefine the best education as vocational training. So this is someone arguing about the definition of vocational training. So you don't need the in-text citation if the author is already mentioned, and the title of an online article with no paragraph or page numbers. So that's good as you're writing. It makes it less clunky. But if you've not mentioned the source, or it's been a long time, just let us know, who the author is if he's not explicitly named. So these are the 4 things. You're going to introduce the source, you have that analysis verb to introduce the quote, you embed the quote, there's a citation, and then I love it when students reflect on the quote. That's like a perfect way to dialogue with sources. And that, of course, is the MLA citation that you would put at the end of your paper. But look at the verbs. So here's a student writing about this idea of what Alfie Kohn is talking about in his article, What Does It Mean to Be Educated? And so look at these beautiful words. Kohn articulates how excellent standardized testing reflects a shallow approach to learning. By using the word shallow, I fear that Kohn, like so many other educators in my field, misunderstand the benefits of testing data. As a future educator, I fully commit to standardized testing the way a mechanic commits to checking brakes to learn something about the driver. Here's another sentence from another paper. Some educators epitomize instructing as teaching students to know how to think. So just look at those verbs. These are just sentences pulled where you're really working on using those strong analytical verbs. There's something called blending, and that's when you just blend the author's words with your own. And make sure you quote it, and it's really beautiful. So look at the third sentence there. Yet without intrinsic motivation, these goals matter little. As I define intrinsic motivation, I hope to affirm, as Kohn did, that to be well educated then is to have the desire as well as the means to make sure that learning never ends. That's just a way to blend the author's words with your own. Okay, so then as you explain, you can use your quotes there to show some background or who else is talking about this idea. You can explain why the problem exists, and then you make your argument. What should we change? What should be different? What kind of world do you want? And it's very beautiful to think about how to kind of write in a way where you're using those excellent analytical verbs. And you can go ahead and start from lesson 4 of How to Write with Flair to use some of these advanced garnish techniques, is what I call them in that book. So using chiasmus, repeated first words, some of those skills, self-answering questions, there's 10 of them in that chapter. And chiasmus is very powerful because it's a good logos-driven technique. And you know what they are. You've heard them many times. You can hear them all the time in the news or in political arguments. The most famous probably is JFK when he says, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So then think about who benefits from this paper. What changes by the end? Also, you want to address your possible opposition. So always keep the reader in mind. The best kind of arguments are always aware of how the reader will be objecting, and you want to just guide them along. And I like phrases like, at this point you may wonder, and you'll notice that as you read some of the sample essays, just how can you actually guide a reader to sort of change their mind and adopt your opinion? And so that's really just a fun way to just keep the reader in mind. Now, the best conclusion techniques. These are sentences you can take for your own conclusion. Explain how we benefit from your argument. What if you had a sentence that just says, when we adopt this new view of whatever, we change how we think about. So what about this? When we adopt this new view of weight loss, we change how we think about personal health. Or you can explain what research questions this now leads to. So I like sentences that are like, in the future, we might consider how. So that's just a lot of fun to think of the skills that you're going to have as you move through this paper. So think about what would be most useful for your field as well, because that will be really good in interviews for future job interviews. When they ask about trends or controversies, you'll have a well laid out argument already about something that may be really important to your field that you hope to change their minds about. All right, so this is a harder paper. You have to toggle a lot of skills. Remember those analytical verbs, and probably the other most important thing is that kairos moment. Find out why this is a current conversation, why it's happening now, where it's happening, and who's having that conversation. And then you enter in as an emerging professional.